Morning Year 8 and welcome to this week's second maths lesson. The intruder has just about left the building. However, the watchful intruder, the new one, is getting a little bit more scary. Can you spot it? It's watching you. Let's move on. So today we're on Statistics 10. Do you understand the correct way in order to do data questioning? That's what we're looking at today. Bronze knows the difference between primary and secondary data. Silver can spot what makes a bad statistical question. And gold can write a good statistical question. Keywords: primary, secondary, tally, questionnaire, survey, bias and personal. And as usual, to begin with, a fast 5 do now. First 2 questions on the current topic, final 3 questions on an old topic. I'd like to pause the video, have a go at those and unpause it when you're ready to mark them. Thank you. Okay, here's the answers. What type of data can only be expressed in numeric form? Quantitative or qualitative? The answer is quantitative. Remember the clue being quantity, quantitative. 2. What type of data is height? Discrete or continuous? It is continuous. It can take any value whatsoever. Number 3, convert 725 centimetres into metres. There's 100 centimetres in a metre, so we divide by 100, 7.25 metres. Convert 3,210 grams into kilograms. There's 1,000 grams in a kilogram. 3.21 kilograms. If you put 3.210, chances are you get the mark, but you do not need that final 0 after a decimal point. And finally, question 5, convert 86 centimetres into metres. Again, we divide by 100. It's less than 100, so it goes after the decimal point, 0.86 metres. Moving on. So, collecting data. Primary data, secondary data. What are the advantages and disadvantages of each of these? First of all, we need to know what we mean by primary and secondary data. Well, primary data is information collected directly from first-hand experience. It's the information that you gather for the purpose of a particular research project. So, for instance, simple examples of primary data: if you wanted to measure the height of students in your class, you would do it yourself. That would be primary data. If you wanted to do a survey of what students thought about school dinners, that would be primary data that you would collect. Secondary data is the data that's already been collected for another purpose, but has some relevance to your research needs. In addition, the data is collected by someone else instead of the researcher himself. For instance, if you wanted to do a study of the performance of football teams in the current football league for the current year, then you would get the information from the internet or from newspapers. That would be data that's already been collected by somebody, and that would be secondary data. If you wanted to do some research into temperatures in various countries around the world during the month of June, again, that would be data that's already been collected, and you would research it from elsewhere, and it is secondary data. Now, what are the advantages and disadvantages of these? Just before we get on to that, primary data from a questionnaire, secondary data from the internet and newspapers, primary data on a data collection sheet, and secondary data from reference books. In fact, I was going to ask you to do that as a question. I shan't bother now. That was just a very quick way of where we can collect that data. So, on to the advantages and disadvantages of primary and secondary data. Primary data is specific. You can choose exactly what you want to investigate. It's got more accuracy because, as I've just stated, you choose it exactly as specific. You've got control over it, you've got ownership over it, and it's bang up to date. You're not finding out about data that was collected a year ago because you're doing it yourself now. But there are disadvantages with primary data. It's more expensive. It's not just a case of looking it up in a book. You've got to do it yourself. You've got to get the materials together, and as such, it's also time consuming. and it's going to be limited. It's going to be limited to the resources that you have available. You might be doing it on your own, you might have 3 or 4 volunteers to help you, but it's limited, and it is not always possible to do in the level of detail that you want to do it. Secondary data. The advantages of secondary data. Usually what you want to find is easily accessible at a low cost, and as such it's going to save you time. You might be able to develop new insights from research that's already gone on before, and larger samples of data are available and are available to anyone. So in this aspect, secondary data has lots of advantages. However, it might not be specific enough, disadvantages, it might not be specific enough for what you require. There's also a lack of control. You're not in charge of the data that's been collected, and the data could be biased, and it's not timely. You could be collecting data that was relevant a year ago or 5 years ago, but which now has no particular relevance contemporaneously. For instance, if you were collecting data on the number of holidays abroad during the summer months, and you took data from last year and extrapolated it forwards to this year, when we've all been affected by COVID-19, the data would be absolutely useless, because obviously foreign holidays this summer have been zero. Not proprietary, not necessarily relevant to the company or anything that's of use to you at this particular moment in time. So lots of disadvantages to secondary data. Much easier to obtain, much cheaper to obtain, but there are lots of disadvantages. So let's move on. You have to decide yourself, by the way, which is more relevant to you, primary or secondary data. So data questions: what kind of data would be best collected using a tally chart, and what other examples of data could be put into a grouped frequency table? Well, if you were looking at data that you could put into a tally chart, the best kind of data that you could put there would be data that is discrete, would be data that perhaps was qualitative, whereas examples of data that could be put into a grouped frequency table would be continuous data, or data that had a wide range of possible answers. For instance, people's age, people's weight, people's height, all these things would be better going into a grouped frequency table. Oh, there we go. Moving on. Data collection then. School dinners are not as good as they used to be. How could you find out if this is true? Let's pause the video. I want you to have a think about that and write some ideas down before we have a look at a possible approach to this. Okay, let's have a look. So this is a hypothesis. School dinners are not as good as they used to be. And with a hypothesis, you need to decide on a sample of people that you're going to ask. But then you need to decide how you're going to ask them. Are you going to ask them through a questionnaire, through a survey? You need to decide what you're going to ask them. You know, school dinners are not as good as they used to be. Do you mean last week, last year, 50 years ago? And if so, that will influence the sample of people that you're going to ask. You need to decide how you're going to collect the data. Once you've got the data, how are you going to analyze it? How are you going to interpret the data? And then how are you going to make your conclusions based on this? So there's lots of different things that you've got to do before you can make the conclusion that school dinners are not as good as they used to be. In fact, this in itself is very general and would need to be reworded in order to make it a more suitable hypothesis for investigation. School dinners are not as good as they used to be last year. School dinners are not as good as they used to be when I was in primary school. Lots of things to be considered. Let's move on. So biased questioning as well. 100 people try a new chocolate bar. Imagine you've got a large stock of those bars and you want to promote them. You want to sell those chocolate bars. What 3 questions would you ask these people? Have a think about that. And at the same time, imagine you're a doctor and you want to encourage people to eat more fruit. what 3 questions would you ask these people now? How can the phrasing of the questions affect the answers, and why might the questions be different? So have a read of that again, and then come up with the answers, come up with some questions that might be asked in order to promote the chocolate and in order to get people to eat more fruit. And we'll have a look in a moment. Okay, so first of all, consider the chocolate. Well, first of all, our questions are going to involve bias because we want to ensure that people went out and bought your chocolate bars. Nice simple one, first of all, to get people interested in the idea of chocolate bars. Do you eat chocolate bars? Yes, no. Followed by, have you tried whatever the chocolate bar's called? Yes or no? And then on to the bias question. 97% of consumers say they prefer this chocolate to other brands. Do you agree with them? Right, that is a leading question. We're leading them into saying yes if they've tried it. Now, if they haven't tried the chocolate, but they do like chocolate, 97% say they prefer it. The chances are they're now going to go out, subliminally encouraging them to go and buy the chocolate and try it so they can say yes or no to the answer to this question. Okay, that's just one possibility. The idea being to encourage, to lead people into going out and buying the chocolate. If we look at the fruit question, the doctor encouraging people to eat more fruit, a doctor's not going to lie, and a doctor's not going to use bias. A doctor just needs to encourage people with the truth. So we start off with, how much fruit do you eat per day? Could have multiple choice tick box answers, for instance. No pieces, 1 to 3 pieces, 4 to 5 pieces, 6 plus. Which is your favourite fruit? Again, with a number of choices, including one for other. You should always have a choice for other. And question 3, eating more fruit improves your health, helps you live on longer, and increases brain activity. Do you think you should eat more fruit? Okay, now this is a little bit leading. Perhaps I could have worded that a little bit better actually. Because what it's doing, it's giving you facts and then it's leading you really into saying yes, because at this point only a silly person would say no. So that question really could have done with a little bit of rewording. But I'm sure you get the idea really that what we're looking at doing is encouraging people to eat more fruit. Whereas with the chocolate, what we're trying to do is bias people towards buying these particular brands. Moving on. What's wrong with this question? How much do you weigh? Rewrite the question so that it's more appropriate. Pause the video, have a go, and then unpause the video when you're ready to have a look. Okay, well first off, me, I've been on and off a diet for the past 2 years. Sometimes I've been doing really well. And when I'm doing really well and people say to me, how much do you weigh? I'm quite happy to tell them. Sometimes I've slipped and I've eaten too much chocolate and too many takeaways, and when people ask me then how much do you weigh, I feel myself going a bit red-faced and I don't really want to answer. The question is too personal and I don't like it. Then again, people don't always know the weight anyway. I mean, how many people can turn around and say, oh yes, I weigh 9 stone 3 or I weigh 108 kilograms? How many people can say that with that degree of accuracy? An experiment involving measures would be more appropriate than a questionnaire. Oh yeah, I can see that. If I went into the staff room with a set of scales and said to all the lady and gentlemen teachers down there, right folks, I want you all to get on the scales, we're going to measure your weight and we're going to record it and do a survey, I can imagine I'd get a few quite negative responses from people. People do not like disclosing their weight. Sometimes they don't even like being weighed at the doctors, even though in many cases it's something that they have to get done. So it's quite a difficult question, and it could be rephrased into something like, just let me go to, no. It could be rephrased into something like, please, what is your weight? A simple question, and then a selection, a tick box selection. So you've got something like 50 to 60 kilos, 60 to 70 kilos, 70 to 80 kilos, and so on, being careful not to overlap the groups. So it's just a case of ticking a box as opposed to having to state it accurately. But again, I don't like these questions. Weight questions in particular are very personal, and a lot of people do not want to answer them. Now, I have some more questions. Rewrite these questions so that they are more appropriate. So pause the video, please, and unpause it when you're ready to see how you've done. Okay, let's have a look. So the first one, don't you agree that football is better than rugby? Well, that's a leading question. It's saying, don't you agree? It's pushing you in the direction of saying that football is better than rugby. A better question, which do you prefer, football or rugby? Therefore giving you a complete, unbiased choice of answer. Exercise is good for you. Only a fool would disagree. Do you agree? Well, immediately there it's being personal and it's insulting you. If you don't agree, it's saying you're a fool. So, no, a very inappropriate question. Do you think exercise helps improve your health? Yes, no. Very straightforward question. Diabetes can cause complications such as diabetic ketoacidosis and non-ketotic hyperosmolar coma. Oh, great. Never heard those before. So, we should eat less sugar. Do you agree? That question's way too complicated. Do you think we should eat less sugar in general? Quite a simple question. Yes or no answer. More questions. What is your favourite sport? Football, hockey, netball, rugby? What's the problem with this question, and can you think of a way of improving it? There we go. Pause your video, please, and unpause it when you're ready to continue. Okay, let's have a look. There's not enough options. First of all, what if their favourite sport is tennis or cricket? There's no option for that. Now, when we have tick box answers, we don't want more than 4, 5, 6 at most. So we couldn't include every single sport, like ice hockey, table tennis, ice skating and so on. So what we could do is just add one more option for other. So if your favourite sport is not one of the 4 named ones, you would just tick the other option. And next one. Cats are better than dogs. Strongly agree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree, don't agree. So what would be the advantage of not including the last option, and can you think of a different way of recording responses? Pause the video, please, unpause it when you're ready to continue. Okay, let's have a look. Well, this last option has actually been covered by the other options. If you look carefully, if you read this through, you'll see that don't agree is covered by what's already been written here. A different way of recording the responses would be a simple tally chart. Which do you prefer, cats or dogs? And columns for dogs, cats and neither. And as you ask people, do you prefer cats or dogs? They just say cats, tick. Dogs, tick. Don't like either, tick. And so on. Very straightforward. Question reasoning. For which of these questions would this answer box be appropriate? So you've got 0, 1, 2, 3 and 4 plus. There are some questions. Which of those questions could you use that tick box answer set for? Pause the video, unpause it when you're ready to check. Okay, let's have a look. How many siblings do you have? Siblings means sisters and brothers. You could have 0, 1, 2, 3 or 4 plus. That would be fine. Shoe size. It's unlikely that you would have a shoe size 1 or 2, but you certainly could not have a shoe size 0, so that would be inappropriate. What age are you? No. How many pets do you have? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 plus. That's fine. How tall are you? No. How much does your rabbit weigh? No, there's nothing in kilograms there. How long does it take you to get to school? No. Okay, so there was only 2 that were actually appropriate for this particular set of answers. Moving on. What's the difference between the answers that could be given to the blue and the green questions, and how would you group the remaining questions? So pause the video and have a go at answering these, please. Unpause it when you're ready to check. Right, so how many pets do you have? Well, that is discrete data and it's quantitative. And how tall are you? That is continuous data and it's quantitative. And if we look at grouping the others, siblings is also discrete and quantitative, as is shoe size. All the others, what age are you, how much does your rabbit weigh, and how long does it take you to school, are all examples of continuous quantitative data. And now, how old are you? Which response box would be most appropriate for this question and why? Also, if you were surveying a group of secondary school students, why might you change these categories? Pause the video and unpause it when you are ready to continue. Okay, let's have a look. The one in the middle, the red grouping, is the most appropriate for how old are you. In the yellow box, the groups overlap. A 10-year-old wouldn't know whether to tick the first group or the second. Excuse me. Same for a 20-year-old, wouldn't know whether to tick the second or the third, and so on. In the blue box, first of all, the average person has got no understanding of inequalities, so wouldn't know what this meant. And also there are overlaps. For instance, less than 20, 20 less than age less than 30, 30 less than age less than 40. There are overlaps. If you were surveying a group of secondary school students, why might you change these categories? Make the categories discrete, as there are only 5 year groups in secondary. So one group for each of 11, 12, 13, 14 and 15 and 16 would be a good way of doing it. There'd be no point having these age groups because you'd have everybody ticking 10 to 19. So you just need one discrete group for each age 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 and 16. Okay, so hopefully in this session you've seen different ways of asking questions, different ways of making sure that those questions are appropriate, they are not biased, they are not too personal, they are not leading questions. You've also seen the difference between primary and secondary data and what the advantages and disadvantages of both are. As I said to you at the start of the last lesson, this has only been very much an introduction to the way that we collect and organise and analyse data, and obviously there is a lot more involved to this, but I just wanted to give you a bit of an introduction so that you could see that there's a lot more to statistics than just finding the mean, the range, the mode and the median. Okay, thank you Year 8. Don't forget to complete the quiz and then enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you and goodbye.